meaning magnificent. What place did the books occupy in these monuments? How many books were collected and used there? How did the book production look like? My interest was to search behind the facades and between the lines for the physical place of the library and the book in the princely architecture. It is well known that the literary output of the Mamluk period was gigantic. It was the age of encyclopedic compendia. Authors like Al-Nuwairi, Al-Safadi, Maqrizi, Al-Dhahabi, they are not in chronological order, Ibn Hajar, Ibn Tahriberdi, Sakhawi, and others, compiled each several massive compendia in 2 digital numbers of volumes, even in the modern printed form. Maqrizi's writing is reported to have filled 116, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani's 150 volumes, and these were not exceptional cases, but rather representative examples of the major figures of Mamluk encyclopedic literature. At the same time, the plethora of biographies of scholars documented in this period complement the image of a society that was probably one of the most bookish in the world. Unlike the caliphs of the classical age, and later also the Ayyubid ruling class, who demonstrated affinity to the Arabic Adab culture, surrounding themselves with poets and men of letters, the Mamluk sultans, who were not native Arabic speakers, were not particularly inclined to Arabic literary aesthetics. However, some of them did demonstrate interest for Turkish poetry and literature. Sufism, rather than poetry, was the main intellectual and spiritual link between the rulers and the native population in the Mamluk period. Although it is known that books were produced for the sultans, not much is reported about a royal library in the citadel. The Mamluk state patronage of the book took place mainly through the religious foundations that could address Muslims beyond the Arabic-speaking world, rather than through regal palace libraries, as was done in the classical age. However, the historians provide only sporadic information about the libraries of the religious institutions. Maqrizi mentions only briefly that the Madrasa of Al-Zahir Baybas had a magnificent library. But, however, the earliest mention of a significant collection refers to the mausoleum of Sultan Qalawun, which was part of his complex of hospital and madrasa. Nuwairi described the library of the mausoleum as substantial and including not only lavish Quran manuscripts, but also books of religious sciences, medicine, poetry, and belles-lettres. It's not clear if this library is identical with the library mentioned in the Waqfiyya of the madrasa of the same complex, or if we are dealing with 2 distinct collections, one for the mausoleum and one for the madrasa. Considering the significance of the long and brilliant reign of Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad ibn Qalawun, who ruled with interruption between 1293 and 1341, which is viewed as the apogee of the Mamluk Sultanate, astonishingly little is reported about the creation of libraries and the production of books at that time. Although the number of mosques and madrasa erected during his reign by himself and his emirs is considerable and unparalleled, no outstanding princely library is mentioned, according to my knowledge, for the first half of the 14th century. Only in 1303, during his second reign, when an earthquake demolished many mosques in Cairo, and Nasir Muhammad assigned the emir Baybas al-Jashnakir with the restoration of the Fatimid mosque of Al-Hakim. Beside the architecture restoration, Baybas endowed the mosque with a madrasa curriculum for the 4 mazhabs and a library of 500 books on various subjects, including history and belles-lettres. A decade after al-Nasir's death, sorry, something went wrong with the notes. Okay. A decade after Al-Nasr's death, his son Hassan founded the Madrasa Mosque that was the most ambitious endowment of the Mamluk period, to which the most monumental building of the Muslim world at that time was dedicated. The madrasa had a library and a librarian, but nothing is known about the content and size. However, the next major library to be mentioned in the chronicles after that of Bayard al-Jashnakir is attributed to Hassan's successor Al-Ashraf Sha'ban. It was endowed to his projected madrasa in the 1370s. Besides lavish Quran manuscripts, and here is one example, the library included 500 volumes. Sultan Sha'ban's interest for books is attested by the magnificent Quran manuscripts that has survived from his reign. Here we have one example, which David James described as the greatest era of Mamluk Quran production, Mamluk Quran manuscript production. Sha'ban's close entourage also includes prominent calligraphers. Sha'ban died, however, before completing his madrasa, which was abandoned to be quarried and its contents scrapped. The library was sold by his successor, Al-Malik As-Saleh Haji, far below its actual value. The buyer was the Ustadar, or Majordomo, of Sultan Farag ibn Barkuk, Gamal al-Din Yusuf, who endowed the library to his madrasa in 1407. The importance attached to this library is confirmed by the fact that Gamal al-Din Yusuf designated his own brother, a prominent scholar, as its librarian, to be succeeded by his descendants. Only a decade earlier, another Ustadar founded a madrasa with an outstanding library. Yusuf's predecessors, the Majordomo of Sultan Barkuk, Mahmud al-Ustadar, acquired a major collection for his madrasa founded in 1393, known as Mahmudiyya, and today it is called the Mosque of Mahmud al-Kurdi. This may have been the most important library of Mamluk Cairo. It was initially collected by a scholar and judge, Burhanuddin ibn Jama'a, who was renowned for collecting only the best. The content of the library amounted to 4,000 volumes, which is the highest number given for a Mamluk institutional library. Maqrizi and Ibn Hajar write that it was unparalleled in Egypt and Syria and included a copy of every book produced at that time. The next important institutional library mentioned in the sources belonged to the madrasa of Sultan al-Mu'ayyad Sheikh. It was composed of books of various provenances or collections, several collections. Some were taken from the Citadel's Palace Library, and this is a rare mention of the Citadel's Palace Library. Others were commissioned by the Sultan, and 500 volumes were donated by the Sultan's private secretary, Katib al-Sir, Nasruddin al-Barizi. Probably in acknowledgement or exchange for his donation, al-Barizi's son was given the post of preacher and librarian of this mosque, to be succeeded by his descendants. The Mamluk Waqf documents do not mention a budget for buying or commissioning books or for writing material in the religious institutions. This is surprising, inasmuch as they always mention budgets for the purchase of oil for the lamps, incense for the mosque, and various utensils for water supply and for the maintenance of the building. Neither do they refer to the content or size of the libraries in the institutions. The Waqf deeds, however, mention a salary for a librarian and sometimes also for an assistant librarian, as well as a space dedicated to the storage of the books of Khizanat al-Kutub. The librarian task was to maintain and restore the books and to serve the readers. The Khizana or library was usually a small space, often without window, for the storage of books rather than for writing activities. I'm going to show some examples. The Madrasa of Sultan Hassan in all its size, and we can see here that the place for the library was rather a small one in the main one, which is here. This is one of yesterday, no, it's another one. This has no, it's not marked. Okay, you have the arrow showing the space, the room dedicated to the library, which is a blind room without any windows, and this is what we see at the Mosque of Sultan Hassan. The Mosque of Sultan Madrasa of Sultan Baku has a small room, also blind, without window, only accessible from the mausoleum and the lower part. So today these are modern shelves that were for the book. This is the place which, according to the Waqf document, was the Khizanat al-Kutub. The madrasa, another one of Mahmud al-Mustada, well, we don't know exactly, probably the space of the library has disappeared, we don't know. The Mahmudiyya, the famous Mahmudiyya, which had the biggest institutional library of the Mamluk period, we don't know where the space was, but it could be, according to the plan, one of the larger rooms we see here, which is the ground plan. The one to the upper right, upper left, there's a hall which could have been used as library, and there's another one, a larger room accessed by the staircase, which is not visible on the ground plan, of course, which has a big room overlooking here with the 3 windows, the main prayer. So all of these were rather small spaces, not big rooms. At Al-Mu'ayyad, it's a little bit larger. We have a kind of reach from the entrance. When you go to the entrance vestibule, today it's an apartment used by the guardians. It's a room or a small apartment. At the complex of Sultan Basbai, it is the room where you have, show it to you. It's a small room. I couldn't see it, I couldn't access it, it's not possible to access, but according to the Waqf document, it should be the room behind the Sabil Maktab. I mean, this room are usually small spaces for storing books rather than a place of activity. So in that sense, Sultan al-Muri also had when I went to look for, according to the Waqf description, I found only small cells attached to the prayer hall, which are today cupboards, but they look like walking in cupboards. So there was no, in that sense, it's something that the Waqf of the religious institution did not provide for a scriptorium. When I mean scriptorium here, I mean a space, not only a space, but arrangements for the production of books, for writing and copying books and writing material in the religious institution. This is not mentioned in the Waqf, which suggests that the production of books was left to private initiatives within the community of the institution and to the market. And we know from many notes written on manuscripts that books were written in the religious institutions as well as privately. I was talking about scriptorium in the sense of an institution. I'm showing you simply that at that time in European monasteries and universities, you had specialized rooms with specialized spaces where people did nothing else but copying. The production of books was shared, was not just left to specialist scribes, not at all. The production of book was shared by the entire community of scholars and students and intellectuals. Writing was a matter of everyday life to any white-collar person, I would say. In order to acquire and gather the study material, students and scholars copied their own books to compose and fill their own libraries. Authors usually penned their own works either as drafts that might be copied by a professional scribe or as a final text they authorized for further dissemination. The historian and scholar Ibn al-Jawzi copied so many books that their number, divided by the years of his very long life, resulted in an average of 9 fascicles, karasa, per day. And to describe a man as ignorant and an impostor, Sakhawi writes, he never studies and never copied a book with his own hand, and he never compiled an entire book. Besides the books they copied for their own use, many earned or improved their living by transcribing books for others and for the market. The cases of the Mahmudiyya and the library of Al-Mu'ayyad show how private collections contributed either to purchase or donation to the development of the institutional libraries. And the library of Sultan al-Ghuli's complex, for example, is reported to have consisted of 2 private estate collections, taken. Unfortunately, we don't know if they were acquired by purchase or confiscation. So although libraries obviously belong to the initial equipment of a princely religious foundation, additional or supplementary Waqf endowments contributed significantly to their growth. And this may be the reason why the Waqf don't refer to a number or to a size or certain specific form of library, leaving it open to whatever comes in. Bibliophiles and scholars have always feared that their collection would be dispersed and wasted after the death, as we all do today. Because books are not always valued by the heirs of a collector as much as cash, real estate, or luxury items, libraries could be scattered and wasted after the owner's death. This gave a strong motivation for collectors to donate or endow their libraries. I mean, this has been already discussed by many others. By making Waqf, the donors, in particular the authors among them, ensured that the collections, including their own works, would be accessible to the desired audience. Also, fear of confiscation, which was common practice under the Mamluks, was a good reason to endow libraries to religious institutions. Not only large collections, but also a multitude of smaller endowments of individual books contributed to the growth of institutional libraries. Often, the owner made the library Waqf to himself, his library Waqf upon himself and his descendants, and ultimately to religious institutions. Many scholars have founded madrasas and zawiyas that included their library, such, for example, as Badruddin al-Aini and many others. The historian and scholar Ibn Taghlibirdi, who, as the son of an emir, enjoyed social prestige and a great fortune, built in 1466 a mausoleum for himself with Sufi service, a Sabil Kuttab, and a library that included all his works. Although the material provided by Mamluk narrative sources, that's in the chronicles and the biographies, is only patchy, the figures regarding the size of libraries suggest that private libraries tended to be larger than the institutional libraries. The Mahmudiyya, described as a major institutional library, is said to have had 4,000 volumes. Several private libraries are reported to have contained around 5,000 books, and the library of the scholar and historian Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani is reported to have consisted of 10,000 volumes. Even if such figures are not precise, they do point to the significance of private collections in the Mamluk book culture. The significance of the private collections is also evident in the numerous references in the sources to the private lending of books. And there's lots of literature also written before the Mamluks and in the Mamluk period about lending practices. Parallel to the lending of books by the institutional libraries, which in some libraries was more restricted than in others, it was very common practice among scholars to lend their own books to colleagues and students, and this was even explicitly expected from them. Ibn Hajar was praised for lending his book to students whose name he didn't even know and he wouldn't ask for, and if the books were not returned or were even sold in the market, he would simply buy them again without taking any measures against the borrower or even refraining from lending his books again. Much has been written in Mamluk biographies and chronicles to indicate that the circle of academic readers relied substantially on the services provided by private libraries. Private collections, of course, were supplied by the book market. The book market was called Souk al-Warraqin, which is a traditional name for book markets all over the Muslim world, or Souk al-Kutubiyin, or simply Warraqin or Kutubiyin. It was located in the heart of the city. between the complex of Sultan Basbai and the goldsmith market. Makrizi writes that the Souk al-Kutubiyin was initially located in Fustat, near the Mosque of Amr, until the reign of Sultan Qalawun, who moved it to the center of Qahira, not far from his complex in Bir al-Qaswayn, and near the prestigious goldsmith market. The book market was appropriated by Qalawun as waqf to his hospital, meaning that he dedicated the rent of the shops to the upkeep of the hospital. This hospital being a major charitable foundation, perhaps the most onerous and beneficent of the history of Mamluk charitable patronage, means that the inclusion of the book market in its waqf investment indicates that its very lucrative potentials. The area already included madrasas of the Ayyubid period and the madrasa of Bayard, making the presence of a book market in this area necessary and lucrative. According to Peterson in his seminal works on the Arab book, the early medieval warraq, deriving from waraq, of course, meaning paper, was a publisher and, I quote, the connecting link between men of letters and the general public, end of quote. The term warraq was also used for the copyist. The warraq was usually himself a man of letters, or even a scholar, and the market of the warraqin was a meeting place for the intellectuals of various contemporary orientations. This is a description for what was in the classical age, and this continued to be the case the same way in the Mamluk period as well. Ibn Khaldun dedicates a chapter in his Muqaddimah to the warraq, or the book dealer. He describes his role as originally connected to the proliferation of academic scholarship, the development of bureaucracy, and the increasing need for the transmission of knowledge. The warraq's task was to transcribe, edit, and check the transmitted text, and to produce and bind the books. The book market was also involved, according to Ibn Khaldun, in the bureaucratic and archival works of various state administrations, including diplomatic correspondence, and they worked also for the mint. This description of the traditional book dealer indicates that it was not confined to the mere trade of books, but included the task of editing and calligraphing books and documents, and even designing fonts for the mint and other state offices. Ibn Khaldun goes on to deplore that with the proliferation of the book in his day, which was the Mamluk period, the transcription of text with all it should involve in terms of editing and checking the transmission and authenticity has declined in the Maghreb and even in Egypt, for which he otherwise doesn't spare praise, having enjoyed there the patronage of Sultan Barquq and his son Farag. As-Subki praises the craft of the warraq as noble because it made Quran manuscripts and other books of knowledge accessible, and at the same time it provided people with the documents they needed to be copied. So this gives an idea of the activities of the market. He recommends that the book dealer should help scholars and students, and he should refrain from producing books on wine, erotic and hedonistic topics, or popular tales and epics, which are only a waste of time, although he admits that these subjects are more lucrative than books of knowledge. More puritanical recommendations were expressed by the Maliki jurist in his manual on the market ethics. Thus, the market also fulfilled the function of a scriptorium, which may explain the absence of institutional scriptoriums in the religious foundations. The book dealer was a profession that required high qualification. Although the term warraq means literally paper maker, there is no clear indication that the book market of Mamluk Cairo included any paper mills or factories. Makrizi rather reported that at his time, the paper mills were in Fustat, near a canal, and the vicinity of water or to a water source, of course, was convenient and necessary for this industry. In the Mamluk period, the term kutubi supplants warraq to describe persons involved in one way or another with the book trade. Many scholars bore the title al-Kutubi attached to their names, although their biographical entries do not always provide information about any commercial activity related to the book. Some also worked as brokers, dalal, in the book market. The dalal played an active role in the mediation between clients looking for specific titles and dealers. He seemed to have been a kind of book dealer without the shop. In the classical age, as in the classical age, Mamluk book dealers were often bibliophiles, scholars and intellectuals, and persons of high social standing, or at least those who earned a biographical entry that allows us to know about. The book trade per se was prone to attract intellectuals, and academic knowledge enhanced the qualification of the dealers and was advantageous to their business. Dealers were praised by historians for providing many dealers for providing assistance to students. Book dealers were also scribes and calligraphers who produced the book they sold. In his biographical book on scholars and men of letters, the Mugma al-Udaba Yaqud al-Hamawi, who died in 1229, himself a dealer in Baghdad, commented always on the writing and copying skills of the men of letter he documented. The book dealer Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Kutubi was called al-Butwat, he died in 1318, was a man of letters and a collector of literary works, some of which were written for him by prominent authors, including the famous shadow play author Ibn Daniel. Although Muhammad himself authored many books, he was proud of his commercial credentials. On one of the manuscripts he penned, he described himself as warraq in both senses, as craftsman and dealer, sina'a wa buda'. Besides the need of scholars and students to visit the book market to find or commission specific books, the book markets of Cairo and Damascus were frequented for their intellectual environment. Scholars were regularly seen there, spending the day browsing and taking notes and meeting with colleagues and peers. They didn't always go there only to buy books, but rather just to read and take notes as in a public library. Some scholars combined their frequent visit to the market with the trade of books without necessarily having a shop of their own. The market was also visited by students seeking assistance and advice. At the end of his entry on the book market in Cairo, Maqrizi adds that it was a meeting place for people of knowledge, magma' li-ahl al-'ilm, and he inserts a poem warning against socializing in the markets because of the bad elements that gathered there. However, the market of horses, weapons, and books should be exception. The first, as opposed to the first two, served men with sense, the latter men with style. So I think here the people of the sword and the people of the pen, the markets of the horses and weapons, and the markets of the book. The book market provided scholars with opportunities to earn a living with part-time jobs such as notaries, shuhud al-'adl, or as copyists of manuscripts and documents. Acknowledged calligraphers offered their services and gave classes in shops. For example, the scholar and judge Ibn Jama'a came to the book market to ask the master in the mid-15th century, to ask the master calligrapher Ibn al-Saykh, who was a big authority in calligraphy at that time, to copy for him a book of 17 fascicles. The job had to be done as soon as possible because Ibn Jama'a had borrowed the original and was not allowed to keep it any longer and had to return it. So he suggested to Ibn al-Saykh to assign the task to 17 of his students to save time. The calligrapher replied that he preferred to deliver the entire book penned in the same hand. And in order to comply with the urgency of the task, he went to the mosque, sat in a cell with some bread, cheese, and water, and completed the 17 fascicles in the same day. I mean, this is showing the calligrapher as part of the market. Auctions were common in the various markets of the Mamluk period. This also applied for the book market, and in particular for the sale of estates of deceased persons that could be acquired at wholesale prices, offering attractive bargains, particularly for dealers. Sakhawi deplored that the death of a book dealer, that following the death of a book dealer, his books, due to the large number as well as to people's ignorance, were sold at wholesale prices. Auction of estates of deceased persons offered also good bargains for ordinary buyers, in particular in times of crisis or calamities. The scholar Ibn al-Mulaqin acquired his library at a very low price in an auction during a plague, an epidemic. He described that he entered the halqa of bidders with a purse full of silver, dirhams, and purchased a musnad of Ibn Malik for only 30 dirhams, far below the original value. But the book trade was a very lucrative business. An example was the doyen of the book dealers in Cairo of the mid-15th century, Izz Muhammad al-Takruri, mid-15th century, from a family of West African origins, Takruri. He was highly educated, trained in calligraphy, and he practiced copying. Some of his teachers were also his clients, and his shop was a meeting point for scholars and intellectuals. Izz-ad-Din made a great fortune with his trade, and we have even his own words explaining how it began. On one occasion, he said, while visiting a book auction, he acquired a volume on alchemy for 25 dirhams. Back home, he put the book on a shelf and forgot about it, until one day he discovered that one page of the book had been damaged by a pigeon that chose the book as a nest to lay her eggs. So, one day as he was browsing in the book market, he met a paper dealer selling batches of old book leaves, among which he spotted a page written with a hand very similar to that of his damaged alchemy book back home. When he asked to buy it, the dealer gave it to him as a present. On his return home, he was delighted to realize that this page corresponds exactly to the one in his alchemy book that was ruined by the pigeon. He eventually brought the book to be restored in the book market and rebound by a bookbinder who also happened to be a broker. The binder informed him that he knew a person was very keen to obtain a copy of this specific book. Eventually, Izz-ad-Din could sell the book for 400 dirhams he had originally bought for 25, and this was the beginning of his career as a book dealer. Izz-ad-Din went on to narrate another episode about a copy of an autographed manuscript he couldn't sell because 16 pages of it were missing. One day, these same pages were offered to him for sale on the market. After inserting them back in the book, he could sell it at a high profit. This episode shed light on the various activities of the book market that included paper trade, bookbinding, restoration, brokerage, consultation, and assistance. The book dealers were antiquarians who dealt with old books and offered restoration services. Sakhawi reports about a scholar and book dealer who pretended to be able to identify the handwritings of authors on anonymous manuscripts, so that he took the liberty to inscribe the author names on anonymous manuscripts to sell them at high prices. He then even went as far as to falsify text by filling the gaps in the damaged manuscripts. Sakhawi didn't like him. I mean, his description is not very favorable. He also blames him for exploiting people's urgent needs for specific books by renting them against a daily fee that exceeded the book's actual price. His excuse was that the book didn't belong to him and that he had to hire it himself from the owner. However, at his death, it was found that he possessed a huge collection of books. The book trade was so lucrative that many scholars abandoned the scholarly career for the book trade. I cannot give the list all here, but it is a long list. For example, the Damascene Muhammad ibn Shakir al-Qutubi in the mid-14th century was a historian who authored, among others, the biographical dictionary Fawad al-Wafayat. He lived in extreme poverty until his life took a lucky turn when he took on the book trade that eventually made him a rich man and with a great fortune. Nur al-Din Abd al-Karim al-Kutubi, beginning of the 15th century, was qualified to be a judge, but instead of practicing this profession, he preferred to earn his living as a book dealer. He owned several shops where scholars came to browse at ease. He specialized in the sale of second-hand books for students. The students were allowed to return at any time the book they no longer needed against a fee. The students, after using the books, usually tried to sell them on the market at an optimal price. If they failed to get the full purchase price, or possibly more, they would return them to Abd al-Karim shop. The historian Ibn Hajar described Abd al-Karim as the last of the book dealers in the market. آخر من بقي في سوق الكتب. He also mentions his son, who was a scholar and a deputy judge, who also traded with books, however only on a part-time basis. The remark by Ibn Hajar is intriguing and raises the question, what does he mean exactly? Was the end of the traditional book dealer a temporary phenomenon to which in Ibn Hajar's own time, own days, or was it a radical development that really is from then on, it was the end of the book trade? It is interesting that the time when Ibn Hajar was making this observation, Sultan Jahmak established a scriptorium in the barracks of the Mamluks at the citadel. Although the education of a Mamluk recruit always included calligraphy along language and other disciplines, and although books were copied by Mamluk soldiers already earlier, it is only since the mid-15th century that we have seen a systematic production of books signed by Mamluks and naming the barracks at the same time. In the past we had only Mamluk scribes, but we now collections in Istanbul, which are essentially late Mamluk collection of books from the reign of Qaitbay and Ghuri, show a systematic, the Mamluk so-and-so from the barak so-and-so and so. So obviously we see a systematic production of books or copying of books in the barak. Here, من طبقة المستجدة al-Ashafi. So the Mustagada was one of the Mamluk barracks at the citadel. So is this development connected to the end of the book dealers, which Ibn Hajar noted? The fact that we have it just under Jahmak, which is about the time when Ibn Hajar arrived, that we have a scriptorium in the citadel. Was this scriptorium created to fill a gap in the book production of the late 15th century? Question. Although the culture of the barracks is not well documented, the foundation of a scriptorium there points to an initiative from the court to consolidate the participation of the Mamluk aristocracy to the book culture. There are many questions about why exactly and how. The reign of Jahmak, for example, was the period when he had a disastrous campaign in Rhodes. Was this a way to keep the Mamluk veterans busy? There are many questions I cannot answer, and I have not been able to find so far convincing interpretation if there is what does this creation of this scriptorium exactly means. The collection of books, of Mamluk books in Istanbul, consists in many libraries, consists largely of books looted from the citadel, and most of which were produced in the very late Mamluk period, mostly Qaitbay and Ghuri's reign. However, they hardly include books from the earlier period, although there is no mention of any disaster at the citadel that might have destroyed the royal book collection. Does this mean that there were no books left from the earlier period and only books were produced in the later period? These circumstances, in conjunction with Ibn Hajar's remark, such that a development took place around the mid-15th century that had an impact on the circulation of books. I mentioned that Sultan al-Muayyad is reported to have endowed books from the Citadel collections to his religious complex. Was this the end of the Royal Library at the Citadel? And a couple of decades later, Jacquemart is reported to have been a bibliophile who paid high prices to acquire the books he needed. One also may speculate whether the endowment of private collections as waqf had the effect of impoverishing the market. Instead of changing hands, the books were mortmain or tied as waqf and would not circulate. And the cumulative effect of waqf could have been detrimental to the trade, as happened with urban estates at the end, real estate of the Mamluk period. I mean, these are only questions and speculation. I mentioned that the Library of Al-Qubr's complex consisted of 2 private collections, rather than books commissioned or selected on the market for the religious complex. This might reflect the difficulty of book supply on a big scale at that time. However, even if Ibn Hajar's observation is to be taken seriously, the end of the book dealers was not necessarily the end of the book trade. The production and circulation of books was not tied or confined to the market as a venue, neither to the religious institutions. It was largely an autonomous network of authors, scribes, broker, middlemen, and readers. There is no doubt that the sheer number of academic pious foundations, madrasas and madrasa khanqa sponsored by and created by a large class of society of literates produced a fertile environment for the production of books. However, the libraries, the institution libraries, according to my recent research, these libraries were not the only suppliers of academic books. I think that the private domain must have played a significant role in the book culture of the Mamluk period. With the diffusion of literary activity also outside the institutions, the book was also broadly diffused. Thank you for your attention, and I hope I have some comments or suggestions about my speculations. Questions, suggestions?
Yes, I know that many of you have to run to class in 5 minutes, but the rest don't have class. Dr. Abu Saif is ready to take a couple of questions, and since Dr. Hadi needs to go, I'll take care of that. Dr. Okay.
First, thank you, Dr. Gave us some fascinating historical information.
One speculation that I invite you to pursue is why in the pantheon of Mamluk arts the illustrated book didn't occupy a big place, given that their predecessors, the Ayyubids, their contemporaries, the Albanians, Timurids, and Kalfiunlu, and Okbiunlu, the Turkmen tribes, placed great premium on this.
Well, this, do I have to have a microphone? Well, this is related, in fact, to what I said at the beginning. The patronage of the Mamluk book is distinct by the fact that it was not like the Ayyubids before, and not like other contemporary dynasties concentrated on royal libraries. There was no royal library as regal symbol, and we don't even know if there was all the time a royal library. The Mamluks, there are 2 reasons, in fact. I mean, first of all, they were focused. They patronized the book through the institutions. So they let the books be written through their religious institutions rather than collecting like the Timurids and the Ottomans and the Safavid and all of that books in their palaces as symbol of royalty. The one thing, and also I think that the orthodoxy of the Mamluk establishment, we have a few manuscripts but nothing except the Shahnameh of Al-Ghudi that points to royal patronage. And I think this was ideological because of the orthodoxy of the Mamluk. They focused on orthodoxy and the book, illustrated manuscript, I think would have broken this image. But it's again speculation. It's an interpretation. I think it was not haphazard. it was too systematic and too consistent to be just lack of opportunities or whatever. Other questions?
Questions, comments?
Forgive my ignorance, but what
Yes,
do we know about?
I just have one
Sorry.
more lights are running, but I just wanted to ask one sort of, do we hear anything about how these, I'm imagining these tiny rooms with stacks of books. Do we know anything about how they're organized? Anyway, I mean, I'm imagining a rather difficult retrieval system.
Well, we do not know much of what they organized because we have no catalog from the Mamluk period. We know, of course, what Konrad Hirschler is this beautiful book on the Ashrafiya, but this is Syria, and this is the royal collection, and it is a little bit Syria still. We have no mention, we know only that Ibn Hajar has made a fiqh list for the Mahmudiyya when he took it because there was a book missing. But we don't know what the fiqh is exactly, or is it an inventory, and there are differences. And so we do not know exactly how they were organized because we have no specifically Mamluk catalog surviving. But we only know that they were stacked, as you see in these pictures, and as you see in the Maqamat al-Hariri. I didn't want to show again the miniature of the Maqamat al-Hariri because it's so well known. I didn't want to repeat, but the books were stacked like this, above in piles, one above the other, and there was a system to put the major ones at the up, and it's even described in the sources how the book. And this picture, I love it because I think it is probably the last picture of a real book dealer of the traditional time as it was in the Mamluk period, and the books are stacked like this. And I have seen myself, I don't know if it exists now in the Azhar area, when you used to go and buy books, that the memory of the librarian played a very important role. He would know in all this that where is what. And anyway, they memorized at that time. I don't know if it's still survived or not. And this was the librarian was a scholar. It was a white-collar profession in any way.
Thank you so much for this. This is wonderful.
You mentioned in the content of the libraries books on medicine, philosophy, no, that's
No, philosophy, not exactly.
So I wonder why are they limited only to books that were used by students, and since philosophy was not really favored?
Which libraries did you say?
Any library for the institutions in madrasas, most madrasas, when you do look at the list of books that they have.
Yes, I think
Did you find any of
not philosophy, but you find on every, on all kind of, not philosophy necessarily, but all Greek sciences were there. We have the Isagogue of Porphyry, which was basic to Islamic studies, because it's a book on logics based on Aristoteles, and you find it among the collections of many fuqaha, the Isagogue, and it's written in Arabic as Isagogue. Of course, medicine, garden, and so on, all the time. The question is to what extent, and this is a very important issue, but I couldn't address it here, is that the endowment of private libraries, and the private libraries included all kinds of things, also unorthodox books, also forbidden topics, also things that would not be considered. When you endow, so the profile of the institution, the library, was open-ended, and it was flexible, and it changed according to the private donation. So unless you have someone who looks exactly at the content of the book, and this is haram, and this is halal, this is orthodox, this is not, the libraries grew, and we know this from, I had worked some time ago on a collection of books, and Abdel Latif Ibrahim on private collection of books that were endowed to Al-Azhar, and include all kinds of things, and which was not only religion. I did not find necessarily philosophy, but Greek sciences, absolutely.
Do you see any relation between the books that were in the library and the curriculum taught in madrasa? So why would a book on Greek philosophy or not philosophy?
But I don't know, because we don't know.
Why would it be in a madrasa?
I have no idea, we have no idea, there's no information about this is the problem, about the contents of the books to be required in the religious institution. The Waqf documents don't say anything, neither about number nor about books. We have occasionally a few inventories of books, which are from the late Mamluk, which show a very variety of subjects, and this also corresponds to what Konrad Hirschler found for the Ashrafiyya, where the majority of the books were not religious at all kind of subject. Exactly, so we suppose, and when we read the biographies, which have been my main sources, people's interests were very, and especially when you're a private collector, were very, very varied and very diverse. So when someone donates his collection to a religious institution, it is part of the religious institution. But we have no catalog, anything surviving telling us what books were contained. Did you come across anything? We don't have a
That's
system.
my question.
No,
I saw the content, but you have in Messina, you have in Rustwo,
Yes.
and Tabari, and all of them.
No, we have in Messina in medicine always.
Yes,
I did not find philosophy. I did not come across in the few cases I had. But you see, the work I am doing is patchy and based on patchy material, on thousands and thousands and thousands of biographical entries, but it cannot cover the whole subject. The only thing that really I'm waiting for, and I think this is a preliminary basis for this, is a codicological study. And this is what they are doing now in Liège, the Mamluk codicological database. Only when people have read thousands and thousands of notes on manuscript, one might perhaps know more about what collection, especially in absence of a catalogue. We cannot do the same kind of work that Konrad did for the Ashrafiyya in Damascus. Sorry. Well, I made me feel, because with all the work I have done, I can only deliver patchy information as well. It is...
Just a tiny question about I'm curious about these blind rooms.
Yeah.
So how it works, because if you have a blind room, books in a blind room, meaning that you will enter with a candlestick, with fire, so you might, burn the books. What was the rationale of having blind rooms?
Well, the blind rooms, perhaps to keep them dry. Perhaps the humidity was a problem. And I suppose if the door is open, you might find the book. But it was not a place for reading anyway. There were not places where... The only one that may have been used for reading, is the one of Al-Mu'ayyad Sheikh, which is quite a big hall and could have been used for reading. And I think like everything else, the scribe, I have somewhere good images of scribes. The scribes of the Muslim world always, wherever I just put them together, and it's not part of my lecture, but scribes were people sitting always without a desk. So they were used putting things on their knees, like since the time in ancient Egypt. But it is applied, you have a board and you put it on your knee and you write. So the copy took place outside the room. And you go to a place where there is enough light and you do your copy, and then you return it. Of course, I always thought if you put it in a blind room, you have to take a lighting implement with you, which is the danger. But I think what is usually mentioned is more the fear of damp, getting damp, rather than the fear of fire. For example, one of the libraries described in the work was on a sabat, on an elevated passage, which means prevented from the humidity. The book market was at some point, they had moved it to near the Akma Mosque and returned it immediately back where it was, because there, because of the many dwellings, they feared that the humidity would damage the books. So, Cairo did not have that many fires like Damascus or Istanbul. So the fire, I think, was not the first threat.
Would there have to be an issue in this case because a room with no windows would be difficult to see from?
Also, of course, also this. Also this. Yes. And even to smooth, theft played a very important role. I have a big chapter in my book about the missing books and the theft of books and the Mahmudiyya. All the history of Mahmudiyya is mentioned because of the books missing, the books stolen, the books never returned. The theft of book was a major issue, in fact, back to days as well. And of course, you could either, with a window, you could smuggle the librarian through even the window grills, could smuggle books of manuscripts, of course. So theft is, I think the biggest issue was the loss and the thefts of books. From what I say, my information sources are patches, biographical literature, mainly. And it is the disappearance of books from our path, even by scholars who just borrow the book and keep them. And after they die, they found in their tarika, in their estates, all those books that belong to this and this and this and this library. I think this was the biggest threat.
Professor, I have a question. Did you find any information about international book trade? Like production of books that were especially done for trade to other countries? Or like...
Well, it's not the first time that I've asked this question. No, but I assume that it was there. I couldn't find it. I mean, I have traveling scholars, but I have no information about international book trade. I know people traveling and taking the books with them, Ibn Hajar going to Yemen and going to Syria and taking books as gifts and things like that. But I suppose that the Cairo book market must have been in its clientele also very international in the sense that inter-Muslim, but I have no information about that.
Thank you.
There is a copy of a Bible written in Arabic in Institut du Monde Arabe, and this copy is completely designed like a Quran.
It's
a Bible written in Arabic, and the copy is designed like a Quran.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, so this is the Bible.
Yes.
And it's very much of the London style.
Yes. So my question is, was there a kind of institution or a same scribe, same artist who were writing like Quran and Bibles at the same time?
Yeah, this is a very good question indeed, which will always remain only a question, because we know very, very little, and the sources do not say anything about production of books by non-Muslims. We know nothing. My information is based on biographies, and the biographies mention only Muslims, especially the later ones. We know that the physician, in the biography in the Ubbid period, where we have physicians, and many of the physicians were Jews or Christians, so we know that they had libraries and so on, and they hired the scribes of the time, so the same scribe would copy whatever they are paid to copy. And we assume, because Ibn al-Hajj also says in his book, you should not write, the Bayard should not write book for Christians and should not write book for, he's very puritanic, I mean this is an extreme, and I'm thinking, and he should not write book for Christian customers or non-Muslim customers. So this shows that, of course, it would be, if you make your living of writing, you are going to write whatever you are giving to write. And the rich ones and the great institution would hire. And of course, there may also have been Christian calligraphers. Why should not be Christian calligraphers? Even they may not be allowed to pen Qur'ans perhaps, but they might not Christian calligraphers. I mean, this is quite possible. So this can find an easy explanation, but I have no information about this because we only after Ibn Sayyidiyah, we don't really have information about biographical information about non-Muslims. They get very, very, very rare. You find them only a little bit in Safadi because he's closer to the period and he copies Ibn Isabi'ah and he copies Al-Mufti or Ibn al-Mufti, but after that we don't know. So the question is if we can find in the archives of the non-Muslim communities any information. That's a good question.
I have an answer for this question. And I can elaborate that in the times, art is the same. I mean, any art style for either a Mamluk, it will go to if there were Christians doing penning the Bible, or so it's like the era itself. It has the same,
yes.
You know.
And also many of the craftsmen, and we know there were Christian craftsmen. We know that when Khalid built his mosque in Jerusalem, he took Copts from Egypt to do that. So, but we know accidentally or occasionally, but we can assume, and there is no reason why, decorators, builders, calligraphers could have been Christians as well, because this was the craft that where they were active. They were active as craftsmen very strongly in the market. So we have to assume, and if the information we have Ottoman period can be also seen retrospectively. We have more information because of the Sigillat of the Ottoman period. And we can see some of them. Many Copts were, till the end of the 19th century, woodworker and craftsmen. So this is probably continuity. It probably was like that also a bit earlier and so on. The fact that the Copts were, for example, very much as in the secretarial work. And secretarial work means you have to be a calligrapher because it is writing documents, and calligraphy is very important. So I assume that there were many Coptic calligraphers, Copts trained in writing well if they worked for the state, because we still make official documents and so on.
Doctor, we know from Makrizi's narratives of the Ottoman palaces in Cairo that it contained a large library with a huge collection. Like what different? The Ottoman palaces in Cairo, we know that through Makrizi's narratives to have contained big collections of books.
Yes, of course, this is university now. Yeah.
Like the different parts of the palaces that we know in narratives have been acquired by this person or that person, and then it went on to their heirs or so on and so forth. Do we know what happened to the collections in the Ottoman library? I don't know.
I mean, there has been written about it, and I will deal with it a little bit, but there is already information. There is a lady who has written an article, what happened, what did Salahuddin do with the Fatimid library. It's, I don't have the full her name, her surname is Bora, and she has written a very good article on how, even if I found in my biographies, I went into the Mamluk period, people saying, I saw a book that came from written by Fulani, which is a Fatimid period, a book that came from the Fatimid collection or so and so. Some books survived the war, and Salahuddin did not burn down the library. It was dispersed, it was redistributed, but the books were not annihilated, they were not liquidated. So the books continue. Then this lady, Bora, she worked on the information, on the historical information you found in the Mamluk period, which can be possible only if they had Fatimid books at their disposal, where they used and integrated their content in their own. So she follows up the heritage itself, the content of the books in books of the Mamluk period, or Ayyubid and further in the Mamluk period.
Any final questions? Is there one final question?
Okay, so please join me in thanking Professor Abu Saif for her visit to AUC.